had a kind of a fascination for Nathaniel. Nathaniel, first of all, is spoken of only in John's Gospel and on only 2 occasions. There is this one at the very beginning when Jesus is just beginning to gather disciples, and we hear how Philip tells Nathanael about Jesus and invites him to come and see. It's fascinating to me that when Philip first tells Nathanael about Jesus, who he is and where he's from, Nathanael speaks in a way that sounds somewhat sarcastic, but in a sense is probably expected. Because Jesus from Nazareth certainly does not fit the mold for who or where they expected to find the Messiah. So when Nathanael says, can anything good come out of Nazareth? It's not really about Nathanael being nasty, it's about him being honest. No wonder when Jesus first speaks about Nathanael, he says, this is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. In a sense, what you see is what you get with Nathanael. He is who he is. The other time that we see Nathanael is at the very end of the Gospel. In the last chapter of John's Gospel, we have some of those resurrection appearances of Jesus. You might remember the story, for example, when Peter and the disciples are out fishing, and they see a figure on the beach. He's identified as Jesus, and Peter, of course, dives into the sea to get to the shore before the boat can even be rowed there. Well, in that story, we're told specifically that it's Peter and Thomas and Nathanael along with the other disciples. I've always found that fascinating that those are the 3 that are named. It makes sense that Peter is named because he's always the lead disciple in a sense. Thomas is named. And remember, Thomas is the one who has had his doubts about Jesus. When he was told of the resurrection, Thomas said, I'm not going to believe until I can see for myself, until I can touch for myself. And then there's Nathanael, who had the audacity to ask that question. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? Nathanael. He raises a question that I'm sure really typifies the kinds of questions that were asked about Jesus all throughout his ministry. Indeed, the greatest accusation against Jesus was that he was not who people expected. He was not behaving as a Messiah ought to behave. He was not associating with the people that a Messiah was expected to associate with. Remember that the expectations for Messiah were great in those days. Israel has long been under the thumb of foreign powers, and at the time of Jesus, under the thumb of Rome. They had been waiting and longing for a Messiah who would come as a great warrior, who, like King David, will trounce all the enemies of Israel and bring them freedom again. They're expecting that when Messiah shows up, going to come to a place of great power, Jerusalem. Not some backwater village like Nazareth. See, Nazareth was a very small village. In Jesus' time, there were probably not more than 200 people living there. And the folks who lived there were, well, they were laborers. They were common artisans who had trades to ply, but had nowhere in Nazareth to offer their work. So most of them traveled a couple hours by foot to get to the city of Sepphoris. Now, Sepphoris was a great city. It was a place that was happening. It was a place that was always building and having something else new added on. And so there was always work for the artisans and the laborers. But Nazareth was nothing. And to suggest that the Messiah would come from Nazareth made no sense at all. So Nathanael speaks the truth as he knows it. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? And we look at the story and we say, well, of course. Because Jesus came from Nazareth, and Jesus brings all this goodness of God to the whole world. But in the day when Nathanael first raised that question, no one thought anything of Nazareth. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of people didn't think much of Jesus either, once they knew where he was from. But what fascinates me most about Nathanael isn't just the honesty with which he voices his question. It's the fact that when Philip says to him, well, come and see for yourself, he does. And not only does he engage Jesus with a kind of openness that when Jesus identifies Nathanael as an Israelite in whom there is no deceit, in whom there is no guile, Nathanael asks, how do you know me? Where did you see me? Have we met before? Jesus said, I saw you sitting under the fig tree before Philip called you. I've known you, Nathanael. In much the same way as the psalmist speaks about being known by God from the very creation of our beings, Jesus knows Nathanael. In the same way that the psalmist thinks about how God knows him through and through, sees the wonders of his life, but also the weaknesses and the faults and the foibles, and yet loves him nonetheless. So Jesus looks at Nathanael and says, I know you, and I love you. And even though we don't hear anything about Nathanael after that until the end of the story, see, the implication is that Nathanael is there all through the story. He not only responded to Jesus, calling him King of Israel, the Son of God, but he responded to Jesus, following all the way through the story. I like Nathanael. because I can see a lot of myself in him, or maybe a lot of Nathaniel in me. On those days when it's hard to believe, when doubts are real, to remember Nathaniel is to recognize, like remembering Thomas, one who could be himself before Jesus and still be loved. The story of Nathaniel reminds me of how strong God's love is for me and for you. No matter who I am